Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin. Wednesday, April 24th at around 4:30 p.m. and my battery's at probably like 10% right now, and I just couldn't resist it because today is such a beautiful day here on the waterfront on Staten Island, facing Manhattan, the Verrazano Bridge. And this is all the area that's sort of Hurricane Sandy devastated, and in particular an area that has had a fair amount put into the restoration of the area into, I guess, native salt marsh. You can see the area sectioned off and being allowed to settle into various states of natural, I guess, if land management park stuff. But it's shaping up nicely. There is some garbage. I'm thinking about coming out here from time to time with one of those trash sticks that you see used in the movies and stuff, and gather from time to time and make my walks out here for as long as I'm in the area. Really have a more positive impact, redistribution of the matter. And today's video is about my continuing transition from a traditional technical SEO webmaster, I guess a fairly advanced one of the sort that could release tools like Hittail into the industry that suggest keywords that you ought to write about, topics, subject matter, suggestion engines, given that what's already known to perform well on your site, given a small little push, like the kind of push that, those little coin drop machines in the arcades provide. If you've ever seen those things in the skee ball joints where you drop a coin in and rakes come out and push it, and then rakes are pushing layers of coins that accumulate up near the edge, and there's sort of a vibrating edge of coins ready to push over. So something that would just push the coins a little further over, and Hittail is one of the tools to do that, and that's one of my contributions to the industry. So I've done stuff. I haven't been as big as, say, Neil Patel, whose website search engine traffic rivals that of major mainstream publications, and whose tools like Crazy Egg continue to be significant tools in the industry. Heat maps to see user experience so that you can refine the site on what people are actually doing. And the era of traditional SEO, they say, SEO is dead, long live SEO, content is always king, quality will always be rewarded. And so there's always going to be some sort of SEO, search engine optimizer in the traditional sense, even if what they transition into is a quality assurance manager for content. It's not sufficiently exciting for me. I got really hung up on a lot of these hands-on things about the field, jack of all trades stuff. I was a webmaster before I was an SEO, in the days where you could really put something together given a server and nothing more than software you could download from the internet once you get the initial operating system installed from scratch. And not from scratch, that would involve burning the computer circuits from sand, but as from scratch as reasonably can be done, both LAMP and IIS SQL Server platforms. I did my share of them, including the sites that were hosted on them. Certain jobs I did soup to nuts, and I physically installed the Hittail servers in the Colo Center back before the cloud took over all that stuff, because you could tweak out the hardware, and I wanted those advantages. So all that hands-on, often hardware-related technical stuff, I do enjoy it. I was the first to unbox the Raspberry Pi. It was my first million-view video. I have subsequently... Yeah, good. Okay, good. Returning a phone. You're welcome. Yeah, no worries. So, webmaster was a satisfying phase of my career, and I have been talking about the transition to something I call data master more and more, because it similarly has a hands-on, soup to nuts sort of feel, although you're not making the systems anymore. You're sort of like a butterfly flitting around between the systems, hitting APIs, scraping, simulating web browsers, automating real Chrome web browser to gather and collect and correlate and do processes too, apply a series of data transformations to data in order to distill it down and get it to an actionable, often dashboard, often Google spreadsheets or Google Sheets based dashboard view of things that can be churned out on a daily basis. You could probably get it to hourly. It's a little overkill based on the complexity of the process you're doing, but most processes can be kept into, say, a 6-hour period, so maybe you could do something twice a day or 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, so you can check the status of things that happens to have hit 5 or 6 different data sources and done pivots and aggregations and applied maybe some machine learning stuff, who knows. But the idea is processes that you would cobble together manually, you now can, you have the ability to even just cobble it together manually. Let me tell you, just to do a process in the first place is a whole field or discipline or career. But once you're given a process, to be able to take that all the way to true automation, sometimes is a lot more difficult than it might seem, because so many of these things insist that you go through graphical user interfaces meant for humans to hands-on use, like on a web browser or an app, a mobile app. But let's say a web browser, so long as it's Chrome is now automatable through its API, and Google has provided libraries to do that. The Puppeteer JavaScript library for Node.js. And so it's easier for me now that I have this data mastering automation concept. I guess I'll go this way, because my goal after this is to pick up pizza for Nat, and then we're going to eat pizza, and then I'm going to work a little bit more and apply some of the thoughts that I'm thinking through in this video, and then bring my kid to work tomorrow, because it's Bring Your Kid to Work Day tomorrow, and I look forward to having my 3rd one with Addie. I think we did 5 years old, 7 years old, and now 8. We skipped 6, I believe. But there was some other event. I was at the aquarium with a homeschool activity that was planned that year, so all very good. But anyway, the thing immediately at hand is enabling tools to make that transition. There are various ways of looking at it, and it's first Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. Capital L for Linux, capital P for Python, lowercase v for Vim, lowercase g for Git. L, P, V, G is the platform, LPVG. And it's most everything you need to do, almost everything you encounter for a career in tech. It is your contingency plan, a small code execution stack and development platform, call it what you will. Everything you need to tackle tech, information-oriented tech solutions, infotech. And after that, the other things I advocate are things like a REPL, real-time execution learning environment for code, so you can essentially poke around in your code while you're writing it, seeing what goes on with the contents of the variables and stuff, just for the sake of learning. It violates the very bare bones, minimal approach of Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, but I advocate Jupyter Notebook. Jupyter Notebook is a way to run Python code, which to all intents, it looks like it's running Python in your web browser. It's not. It's running in virtual machines that are tied to the tabs in Chrome, which are themselves already sandboxed virtual machines. So there's a very interesting, very modern story here about how code executes. execution context for code. But what I'm telling you is that when you're learning Python, install something called Anaconda, which is the easiest way to get Jupyter Notebook installed, which is the easiest way to write and execute Python code to get started. And it has the added benefit that it's in something called notebooks that can be traded around pretty easily, so that other people given the same notebook and data source files will get the same exact results running this code as you. And that provided a certain multi-platform portability that I used to pursue in something called Linux, my spin of Linux, based on a few components such as very popular QEMU, which is a PC emulator binary distributions to get a consistent platform, and then Tiny Core Linux, which is a very bare bones version of Linux, just enough to get a command line going, and a very simple software repository system like the Debian or Ubuntu software repo, which is very popular, but it's a much tinier and smaller group of people creating plugins or apps or repo, easy install software packages for Tiny Core Linux. And so my version of Linux, Levinix, was an attempt to make a truly multi-platform thing, because you could get with a double click from the desktop of Windows or Mac or even another Linux desktop, a tiny little Linux virtual machine where all your Python code would run exactly the same. And so examples could be given around. My idea was that my software suite that I had developed back at the time could just easily be run on anyone's desktop, but there was a price cost, especially with these old QEMU binaries, and a liability of supporting it, which when I saw what the Anaconda package is and all these things that it gives pre-installed and all these commonalities it does to cut across platforms by leveraging the web browser, I saw that that was exactly what I was using Levinix for. So I essentially gave up on Levinix. I keep it around because it's popular in GitHub. It's one of my claims to fame. But if you want to write code that can be used anywhere and for anything, write your Python in Jupyter Notebook, knowing you're going to lift it out of there, put it into other locations, switching environments and execution contexts, and things really change. But you're minimizing that change by keeping your Jupyter Notebook environment as close as possible to the headless Linux cloud generic scheduling server you keep off somewhere. So you work and you practice in Jupyter Notebook where you can get a feel for things and experiment rapidly and write a program while you run it. If you can wrap your mind about that, it's a very special execution context that's used mostly in learning. And because Python is based on a learning language, ABC, what you get is this ideal environment for just learning to code, and in the cuddly, warm, cozy environment of a web browser where you don't feel like you're doing anything different than any average website would be asking you to do, except it's real Python to the extent where you can copy and paste what you did into places that are 24/7, 100%, well, not 100%, but highly reliable cloud, headless, generic Linux servers, often used for scheduling, often used for web servers, but that was the old world. That's being webmaster, not going back to that path. There's so many ways to publish data now that it's silly to spend your time developing skills in a place where it's 100 cheap alternatives. Now you want to spend your time developing skills where there really is no alternative, except often for very expensive vendor software. So you, as a hired professional, come to the picture with skills that they would otherwise have to pay lots of money for. And that's a data master, automating these processes. So my next step is automating some processes that have eluded automation for a very long time, and mastering the automation of Chrome across multiple platforms, of which Jupyter Notebook really is one because it sits very much on top of Windows or the host operating system, and it knows about that, and it makes its own adaptations. So it's Windows in my case because I'm on Windows 10. And then there is when you lift that up and you bring it over to your local Linux environment where you test it for scheduling. I'm using WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux. It should be WLS, the Windows Linux subsystem, but they went with WSL, and it provides the Ubuntu Bash shell, which, long discussion there, but it's probably the best, most generic Unix/Linux shell you would want. This, by the way, is my destination, Barry's Pizza, very good pizza. I'll be stopping in there in a minute, but I should really wrap this up. The third execution context is that generic cloud instance, which in our case and in many people's cases is just a Amazon Elastic Computing Cloud, Amazon EC2 provided generic Linux instance, which you can choose the flavor. I choose Ubuntu because it gives me a repo I'm very familiar with. They provide a few, including their own called AMI, if things are still the way they are, and I would choose Amazon's optimized version, but I know that they put the effort into optimizing now even the Ubuntu versions. Now that Microsoft essentially bought Ubuntu, I mean, I know it's not that, but they're certainly Canonical's largest customer by what, 1,000 times larger than anyone else. So Microsoft has a lot of influence over the Ubuntu platform, which already was a decent implementation, especially with them giving up that Unity user interface thing, custom user interface. They're going back with the standard stuff that's used free and open source forever, that people are familiar with. It doesn't require any buy-in. So there's a lot of alignment of forces on that happens to be non-Red Hat, non-Microsoft. The loser in this is repo systems that are less Ubuntu or Debian-like and more Red Hat or IBM-like because Microsoft chose the bad boys, the Debian camp. Anyway, I digress a lot. It's a third platform is the point. So my Python code has to be copy and paste liftable from where you feel things out in Jupyter Notebook, where you test the local Linux automated version on your local machine, and then on the cloud ultimate destination machine. There's a lot of paths that can change, a lot of environment variables that can change. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm taking care of all these tiny checklist items so that when I do work, it's stable across all these platforms. Some might say, oh, just use the headless Linux. There's so many advantages of using your local desktop or your laptop or whatever for stuff, because processing power, speed, working offline, all kinds of reasons that come into play when I describe the Linux, Python, Vim, and Git platform. But long story, slightly less long than I could make it, you want to be able to use your tools to the best that they can be used without locking yourself in a long-term expensive mistake. And embracing proprietary tools for what they're worth is very worth it. It's a good deal. You paid the money for that hardware. Lean into its strengths. Take advantage of what it's trying to make easy for you. And you're pushing around the costs. You're always going to pay the cost anywhere. So I am currently paying the cost and figuring out the tiny multi-platform issues that remain when you choose generic Linux, Python, Vim, and Git as your primary computing platform, but you're willing to use Jupyter Notebook on your local Mac or PC because it's awesome to do so, knowing that you're one copy and paste away from something that's a lot more Linux-like and local, whether you're on Windows or Macintosh or native Linux desktop. Everyone is close to something that's a lot like the Ubuntu Bash shell, which is a command line text type in user interface that I'm going to walk everyone through getting good at. It's all the stuff Steve Jobs hates, but which gives you superpowers if you embrace it and master it. So that's what you can expect from me at this channel. I am recently married to Nat, who you'll be seeing more and more of. She's interested in a lot of tangentially related stuff, so we plan on mixing together and interweaving our two web presences, maybe doing some together in the same video. And here I am at Barry's Pizza, so I'll see you later. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.